Elder Race, Part 11. Prelude to an Exorcism.
Of their fate, I will not say. I hope that somewhere, far from here, they have found the peace that they crave. I will not tell you, dear reader, where they are or what they are doing, or that they even live at all. They have earned that much. They have become beings of near mythical celebrity for all humanity, and billions remember them with a fondness born of hero worship. I cannot remember them that way. All I remember were tools that I built and used and tossed away when they broke. And so, I will tell you nothing, for that is all that I deserve to know. I have done enough damage. It is someone else's turn.
The Honorable Councilwoman Shilin in Guandalawas, Empire's End. Carlos. 5 months after Androm's folly. Classified training facility. Council station. Council space.
Be still and silent. Look into yourself. That is how you will see him.
Shilin muttered softly nearby. Carlos took a deep, measured breath and pushed at the edges of his consciousness, searching for Adam. Ever since Adam had woken up from his grief-stricken coma, Carlos had felt as if there was somehow something more between them, like a tiny, invisible strand of silk that occasionally tugged at the edges of his mind. Every now and then he would catch glimpses of Adam's thought processes, or sense a glimmer of emotion that swirled like smoke just outside of his cognitive reach. He had first noticed it as he struggled through the long hours of study and instruction that Shilin forced him through immediately after Adam's recovery. For up to 12-hour stretches, Shilin had crammed Carlos' head so full of information that he felt he might burst should he lay his head upon his pillow with too much force. The history of ancient Earth, the American Empire and its many civil wars, the wasted ambitions of the English, the monolithic glory of the Chinese, the bloodthirstiness of New Japan, and the meteoric rise of the free African Republic that took control of an entire continent, then unification of Earth, the first, second, and third human empires, the Republic, the rise of the houses. He devoured the culture, history, sociology, and art forms from all these eras and found himself wanting more. It was when Shilin described first contact with the taint that he noticed what could only be described as a small bulge at the very fringes of his apprehension. It quietly told him that he recognized this event, which was impossible. It had occurred 1,000,000 years before his birth. Carlos had ignored the tiny voice and moved on. It happened again when Shilin was speaking at length on the burning of Hela. This moment in human history was described by many blue bloods as the turning of the tide in the war against the taint, the watershed in which things took a decided turn for the worse. The taint had infiltrated the garrisoning fleet at Hela. The tainted personnel killed the untainted and took control of the ships, firing on and destroying those that they hadn't managed to take, before finally turning their massive guns upon the innocent and unsuspecting civilian populace on the surface of the planet below. Images had risen unbidden to his mind. Flashes of dismembered corpses floating in the cold vacuum of space, illuminated by the soft flickering light of a planet being burned to a cinder, as seen through the eyes of a man who knew he and his brethren had arrived too late. Carlos had turned to Adam then, taking note of the fine etchings of melancholic thought played out across the skin of his face.
You were there,
Carlos whispered.
Too late, brother Carlos.
Adam had murmured back.
Not there. Much too late to be there. We only found the cold, frozen bodies that the bad things had left behind.
You've never called me brother before,
Carlos had said slowly, as if he might startle Adam into flight.
You have never seen the things that I have seen before. Now you have. Now we are user-helper brothers.
Adam had replied simply, before turning his attention back to Shilin, as if this new bond between them had existed all along. Later on, Carlos had asked Shilin about his connection with Adam. She had said nothing, but he detected a satisfied glint in her eye as she informed him that she had taught him everything that she could, and that it was Adam's turn. Which brought Carlos here, to this moment, as he sat and desperately searched for Adam's presence in the next room over. It was like grasping at smoke in the darkness, unable to find anything, particularly since it had been so easy when the images and emotions had come to him unbidden, filled him with frustration. He let slip a heavy sigh.
I can't feel him anymore. If I try to catch hold of him, he just disappears.
The Ulfrindhar were meant to be the next step in human evolution. Humanity was remarkable among the elders in its complete lack of psychic ability. We built Adam and his kind in an attempt to rectify what we considered to be biological imperfections. We failed, of course, but we did manage to open the proverbial door part way. Adam is bonded to you. He has the psychic ability, not you. You must not search for him. All you have to do is open the doors and let him in. Do that, and you two will truly become brothers.
So you're saying that I should surrender to him?
Carlos kept his eyes shut tight in an effort to maintain his concentration, but the frustration that swirled in his gut made even that much extremely difficult.
I'm not telling you to surrender to him. I'm asking you to accept him as a part of you.
So he and I can serve as your pawns?
Carlos muttered at her.
I'm not stupid, you know. All my life I've been used up and thrown away by blue bloods just like you. What makes you think we'll help you once we've bonded? What's to stop me from just walking away from all of this?
Because, young Carlos,
Shilin replied patiently.
if you don't help me, Delegate Arkutu and his council will never let you or Adam see the light of day. They'll probably kill me, by the way, although I doubt you care very much about that. On the other side of the MZ, Androm will brutally suppress any and all uprisings before storming the Divide and conquering the known galaxy. There will be nowhere for you to run to. In a conflict like the one that is coming, there are no non-combatants.
Carlos, of course, knew all this already. He'd known that it was his only option to comply with whatever Shilin said from the very beginning. He was in no position to defy his captors. But if he could get Adam on his side, then he would have a fighting chance to break away from a fate that had been set down for him. The concept of autonomy was alluring and, from his understanding, almost achievable. In theory, anyway. He just had to destroy an empire and escape in the confusion. As he considered his options, Carlos felt ghostly fingers creeping toward his innermost place. It was perhaps the most invasive feeling he'd ever felt, as if his entire being was on the verge of being bared to the world. Adam? Carlos jerked in his seat and gasped as the fingers shot forward and squirmed into his core. What could perhaps be described as his soul? It was painful, agonizing. His muscles tensed and shook as he let forth a scream, his neck corded with the effort. He arched his back as the scream faded into a tensed-up groan, before he finally slumped in his chair. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot and unseeing as he was dragged into a world deep within himself. Brothers. Mara, Parvati. 5 months after Androm's folly. Orbital Communications Facility. Brea. Far reaches. The building was rather imposing, kind of like the ancient cathedrals, mosques, and other holy places that had been common on old Earth. Much like the old places of prayer, it was a focal point designed to send messages to the gods above. In this case, the gods were replaced by a huge garrisoning fleet, meant for keeping any Xeno incursions at bay, and roving Imperial secret agents, all of whom reported to the head honcho. The Big A Emperor Androm, the Mad. Yes, Marfa reasoned, this building still communicated with the gods in a way. The day was cloudy and cold, as so many were on Brea, thanks to the pesky stubbornness of WMD-induced climate change. The Bureau for Terraforming and Environmental Preservation had been tearing its hair out over the problem for decades with no sign of any solution in the near future. Marfa wasn't particularly fond of the weather here, being more comfortable in far warmer temperatures, preferably beside a beach. But she had to admit that the dire gray clouds seemed to tastefully frame the huge communication spire in a manner that was quite fetching, and it also seemed to add a little spice of drama to what was to transpire soon. Well, enough about that. Marfa had work to do.
Any weapons, Mom?
Mara shook her head and dutifully held her arms out as the security guard perfunctorily ran a scanner over the curves and ridges of her body. The whole affair was conducted with a business-like disinterest which was completely at odds with its importance. This facility was the only one of its kind on Brea, meaning that all off-world communication ran through it. Despite the strategic importance of this site, and the wave of violence that had rocked the Imperium and the occasional personal forays of Androm Winchester to quell it, the Imperial security forces at Brea had remained largely complacent. Brea was a quiet backwater, and the powers that be did not have the time or resources to develop the infrastructure required to create a thriving planet. The rebellions had risen on worlds like Frigga, Durin, and Nova Tokyo, all of which were bustling metropolitan centers that served as focal points for trade along the far reaches. Brea had nothing truly to offer in that regard, besides being an important staging point and outpost should any further invasion attempts into Andorran space be deemed wise. As such, Brea had remained largely untouched by troubles of any kind. Satisfied, the guard held his hand out expectantly for her ID. She handed it over, mirroring his bored expression as he put her information through the scanner. She took the moment to study him. Average height, with hazel eyes and sandy hair, cut and slicked professionally underneath his cap. Handsome, she concluded, but not mind-blowing. She, like many of the new generations who were newly free to pursue relationships as they saw fit, a surprisingly recent development, as previously private relations were tightly controlled, with state approval required to have natural-born children, or even initiate a casual dalliance. The consequences of not acquiring approval were surprisingly dire, had taken to playing this game whenever she saw a member of the opposite sex she had never seen before. The next stage of this was to try to figure out what he thought of her. Mara was under no illusions. She was no bombshell, nor was she particularly ugly. She would honestly describe herself as plain. She was slightly saddened to see her assessment of herself mirrored in the utterly uninterested eyes of her taciturn security guard, as they roved over her black, difficult-to-control hair, dark eyes, and thin but by no means shapely body. It didn't help that she was hidden behind layers of frumpy uniform. Her skin seemed to make no difference in his assessment, despite it being her favorite thing about herself. It was supple, clear, and smooth, and its smoky darkness gave her a sense of oriental beauty reminiscent of those mildly racist and sexist pin-ups that soldiers were so fond of from old Earth. She'd seen a few hidden away in the public archives. Beautiful, but not mind-blowing.
Go on then.
The guard muttered to her brusquely, and Martha immediately strode off, all thoughts of fuckability tossed to the wind. Time to think about the job. She moved through the facility like a whirlwind, her stride as confident as a femme fatale's, her back straight, and her demeanor as poised and professional as any officer could ask for. She barely paused as a facility courier passed her a messily wrapped bundle and hurried on. She walked into her workstation as if she owned the place, where her facade promptly shattered. Someone had knocked over an office chair and never bothered to pick it up. Mara didn't see it, as it lay below her line of sight, and confident people rarely looked down at their feet and tripped.
Watch it!
Wilhelm shouted out, jumping forward to catch her, bringing her forward momentum to a halt just before she fell on top of a bright red button protected by a glass case, a lock, and a handprint scanner.
What's that one do?
Mara laughed breathlessly as Wilhelm helped her catch up to her own feet.
Blow everything up?
Ha! I wish.
Wilhelm guffawed, dragging his voice down to acceptable workplace levels as his outburst attracted the irritated glances of the other 4 people in the room.
Sometimes I forget that you've only been here for a few weeks. That's the emergency override. Shit goes down, you press that button. All civilian communications are shut down and this control station goes into lockdown. The only thing you can use is military broadcast channels, and they can only be issued from within this room or from the garrison fleet.
Oh, okay.
Mara nodded. She, of course, already knew everything there was to know about the process he just described. Before sitting down at her assigned station and placing the bundle the courier had handed her at her feet, she then braced herself for the coming tirade of useless information that Wilhelm would unleash upon her. The topic subjects of Wilhelm's daily lectures would vary widely with no rhyme or reason. It could be about his newly acquired wife, their expected baby, crappy things their supervisor had done or said, or how much he deserved a promotion out of this dead-end assignment. There were 2 things that were always a common element to Wilhelm's hour-long, rambling, one-sided conversations, and those were that they were, without exception, extremely boring, and they always seemed to reveal new depths of how much Wilhelm hated his job. The end result of all this was that Marfa knew far too much about Wilhelm's life, and next to nothing about her other 4 co-workers. She only knew the name of one other, Shinbuchi, and he was remarkable only in how little mutual interest Marfa and himself displayed towards the other. The other 3 may as well have been robots. As Wilhelm was finishing up his latest story, something about his wife and her mood swings thanks to the coming baby. Mara's supervisor walked in, looking disheveled and swigging at a coffee as if it was the nectar of life. A set of keys jangled at his belt, attached to one of those retractable elastic cords that seemed to be a universal issue to anybody who had some mid-level management job in a secure facility. Mara made eye contact with him and winked mischievously, which made him splutter a little into his coffee and turn a pleasing shade of pink. Unlike Wilhelm, Martha intentionally knew far too much about her supervisor's life, one administrative sergeant, Angus Kelly. She knew, for example, that he couldn't handle his liquor, especially when he was slipped something secretly naughty, where he lived, and what he liked to eat for breakfast. She'd also discovered all of these things last night at Dicey Riley's. Workplace relations were frowned upon, but if no one knew, then it was all fine. And no one would ever know, particularly since the sergeant had revealed some things he shouldn't have about station security, meaning that he was rather anxious to keep the whole affair under wraps. Fine by her. She checked the time. It was 8:44 a.m. 1 minute. Mara reached down and picked up the package, and began to calmly rummage through it, as if it was her purse and she was searching for her keys.
What's that?
Wilhelm asked brightly.
Oh, nothing really.
Mara replied.
Just a little present from a friend.
She attached the suppressor to the Ubizia 7 12mm tactical pistol, with a twist, and as she finished speaking, calmly removed it from the crude wrappings and shot Wilhelm. His head was punched back, splattering blood and brains across the monitor, leaving his body slumped and still grinning brightly, drained of warmth and fixed unsettlingly, as a red mist hung in the air. The harsh whump of the pistol had drawn the attention of Angus Kelly, who turned from reviewing Shinbuchi's work to see what was going on, his eyebrows drawn into a quizzical furrow. Marcia swung her office chair to face the rest of her co-workers, who were arrayed in a neat arc following the edges of the room, and began to fire dispassionately, switching from target to target with cold precision. Angus Kelly was the first to go, one shot taking him in the throat and the next in his chest. He fell to the floor and expired with barely a gurgle. Shinbuchi did not have time to turn before a bullet found the back of his skull, launching his head forward to crack into the glass monitor. The next three died in similar states of unpreparedness. None were able to make a sound, as they turned towards the source of their demise with varied looks of surprise, incomprehension, and horror. It took 11 seconds for all five to die, and Mara sat in the now eerily silent room. She still had work to do. She quickly glanced towards the open hallway. There was no one. Reaching into the wrappings again, she withdrew a newly sharpened cleaver. Face hard with determination, she crossed over to Angus Kelly's body and yanked out his arm, bringing the cleaver down with all her strength to sever his hand at the wrist. It took 3 strokes to get it off. By this time, her face and uniform were liberally splattered with dripping, sticky blood. Some part of Martha recognized that she would probably have to deal with this in some sort of therapy session at a later date, but that part was silenced by the cold logic that now ruled her thoughts. This was her job and jobs had to get done. Otherwise, the whole rebellion would fail. She picked up Angus Kelly's hand and walked back to the emergency override. It had taken her a while to discover whose hand she needed to actually open the case, knowing that she and her co-workers were not high enough in the pecking order to be allowed such a responsibility. Angus Kelly's loose tongue, liberally greased with alcohol, drugs, and sex, had provided her with the answer she had been seeking. She pressed the hand against the scanner and jammed the key into the lock. With a beep, the case popped open. Marcia slammed her palm down on the emergency override. Sirens immediately began to wail and lights began to flash. The blast doors leading to the control room came hissing down, sealing it off completely. Mara wasted no time in crossing back over to Shinbuchi's body and removing his headset, before unceremoniously dumping his body to the floor. She sat down in his chair and tried, in vain, to wipe some blood off of the monitor, before typing in several commands, one of which was a specific communications frequency.
This is Judas 2-2. Control room secured and communications cut. All clear to commence the assault.
Mara said clearly into the headset.
Copy that. Judas 2-2. Operation Exorcist is a go.
Came the harsh, deep voice of General Gerard Stevenson.
Thanks to you, we'll have some angels in the sky. Send the code and sit tight. We're coming. Alpha, out.
Shilin. 5 months after Androm's folly. Classified training facility. Council space. Shilin sipped at her tea and perused the data slate one of her newly acquired subordinates had brought her. It was a message from Vitraki, pledging her support for the coming vote. Excellent.
Thank you.
She said, smiling politely and handing the slate back. The being who had handed her slate was an Andoran shrieker named Talisi, who was supposed to be one of many guarding this classified nest of humanity. Arkutu was rightly cautious of the havoc that Adam and Carlos could cause within the station should they decide to, and so he had sent a contingent of shriekers to keep them contained. However, it would appear that that decision was a mistake. Talisi was one of many of her race who had come looking for the Mother. The Mother was a mythical figure out of Andoran folklore. She was the initial leader of the Shriekers. Shilin had later learned that the true name of the subspecies was Frilter, with their mainstream Andoran cousins referred to as Ossultar, who led them in the creation of some sort of Friltar utopia. It all came crashing down, as it always does in stories like this, with some sort of natural disaster that changed the face of their homeworld and plunged it into darkness for a time. The Mother was lost, and the Frilter were transformed into a nomadic and fierce warrior society until they were pacified by their far less warlike Ossultar cousins. However, there remained a belief nestled snugly in the hearts of many of the Frilter that the Mother would come again and lead them into another golden age. Ever since she had successfully intimidated the Karak delegate Vitraki into seeing things her way, she had had to deal with a sudden influx of Friltar warriors who referred to her deferentially as Mother Zeet. Apparently, many of the Friltar she had beaten into submission during that time had decided to start spreading the news. Within a month, over 3,000 of the Friltar who worked on the council station had sworn allegiance directly to her, providing her with a useful information network. There would have been more, but Shilin had quickly put an end to it by instructing Talisi to turn them away with promises and assurances that she would call upon them when the time was right. The reasons behind this were twofold. The first being that Arkutu considered himself the de facto leader for both of the Andoran species. Arkutu was an important player in the game she was playing, and she did not want him withdrawing his support because he discovered that she was in the process of taking something like an eighth of his power base. The second was that having a dedicated support base with which to achieve her aims drastically changed her role within the council. To many of the council delegates, Shilin was not a threat. She operated in an advisory capacity and had no real power of her own. Many of the delegates foolishly believed that this meant that she had no power at all. They were tragically mistaken. The shadows behind the throne hid many things. If it became known that she controlled the loyalty of a sizable amount of Frilter, many of the delegates would begin to consider her a threat. She wanted them to throw their support behind the rebellious new generations, thus saving humanity, by extension the galaxy, from the taint, and they would not do so if they considered her or the new generations more of a threat than the Empire. She had to appear as powerless as possible. It helped a great deal that she had been abandoned by her crew after they had docked at the council station. For now, the council believed her isolated and weak. Only Vitraki knew otherwise, despite Arkutu's suspicions. Sighing at the carefully laid plans and political maneuvers that had the potential to become nothing more than a tangled mess, Shilin swiveled in her chair to look at the two men in her care. Adam and Carlos sat side by side in meditation couches, eerily silent, their eyes now closed and their breathing barely detectable. If Shilin didn't know any better, she would have mistakenly believed that they were dead. She had had Adam moved into the same room after her Frilter had reported Adam plunging into a deep sleep at around the same time that Carlos had started screaming. They were being bonded, but how long that process would take, she could not say. She needed it to be soon. She couldn't make her move against the Empire without them, and time was running out. The coded messages she received from Dmitry Kurchenko and his exiled Blue Bloods seemed to imply that several uprisings had already been suppressed. Hurry up, boys. White. White was the color that meant new, clean, pure beginnings. White was the first memory he remembered, the first thing that he knew, the only thing he knew. Before the garden and the user helpers and his lost-found family, there was the white. That was all he knew. That and nothing more. Then came the noises, songs, roars, the sing-song, rumble, bark, and whisper murmurs of the blank-faced white coats that floated about in the white world outside his little bed.
You're the first.
They said to him, in their many voices.
the first of many. You will save us.
They were wrong, Adam would know. So very wrong. He could not save them. Nothing could. The bad things were too bad, and Adam and his maid brother's family were too few and too broken. But he knew none of that yet. All he knew was white and the many voices. Adam was in two places now. He was small and calm inside his bed, and also big and strong and right beside it. Future brother Carlos stood beside him, his cold gray eyes taking everything in like silver black holes.
This is it.
Big Adam said, his voice seeming too loud and too real for this world made from white smoke.
This is where you will know. Soon you will know what it is to be me, and I will know what it is to be you. Soon we will be Carlos and Adam no longer, but the same man, bonded by pain hurt.
Carlos nodded as he looked down at little Adam. Little Adam could not see him. This world of white was not for them to move touch, only to see. Memories cannot be changed.
Do you want to be my brother?
Yes.